It is great to see everyone today through these challenging and obviously uncertain times. I'm just wishing that all of you have stayed home and been safe, and everybody's healthy in your family, and things are going well for you and yours. This is my 21st NFL draft, and certainly the most unique. So today when I got up and we decided to talk about special teams with our scouts, I thought it was only fitting that I rocked one of my favorite jerseys, my old school throwback Pat Tillman jersey. And really just to remind me and all of our scouts, when you're looking at these players, particularly special teamers, it's not always about the bells and the whistles and the measurables and the height, weight, and speed. It's a lot about the heart. And certainly Pat Tillman was a guy who represented that. And it's hard to believe that just 22 years ago, I think this Sunday, he was the 226th pick, compensatory pick in I believe the 98 draft. So I know a lot of you are going to be in Pat's virtual run. I believe it's this Saturday. And again, very, very excited about this draft. And even though it'll pose some obstacles, I feel like we've put in the work and we're prepared.
All right, Steve, well, it looks like Craig Fouey is first on deck, followed by Scott Bordeaux. So I'll turn it over to you, Craig.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Steve, thanks so much. I mean, with when you look at holes that you have to fill, where are you looking at? Are you looking at offensive line, receivers, defensive? Where are you in this whole thing?
Well, Craig, I mean, I do feel like we supplemented some of those needs through free agency. But as I've always said, it's my job to make sure that I see the constant holes in our roster. And I don't think there's a position that we still can't address through this draft. I think there's not only starter help that we can acquire, but obviously some depth and some backup positions as well. And certainly always want to try to improve your core special teamers.
Turn over to Scott.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, just did the DeAndre Hopkins acquisition kind of change maybe your need for drafting a wide receiver high in this draft?
I don't think so. I think the one thing you have to look at, not just the DeAndre Hopkins acquisition, but, you want to look at the long-term contracts that you have in place, whether guys can play inside or outside at those positions. So if there's a player that we cover, and it's at the right spot and somebody that we're high on, we'll certainly take advantage of that. Again, I say this every year, your needs are always changing. So just because it may look like on the surface that we're not as needy at wide receiver, that could change pretty quickly.
Next up, Richard Sines, and then Mark McClune, please.
Yeah, Steve, you kind of touched on the offseason. Because of the offseason that you had where you picked up so many different players in different positions, is there a possibility that you could trade down or be active when it comes to trading in the first or second or third rounds?
Yeah, we could, Richard. There are certainly opportunities that we'll look at if they present themselves, and trading back is one of them. We've even had some conversations about trading up if the opportunity presented itself and a player we coveted was there at that spot. Again, we'll take everything into account, and we'll make the best decision for this organization on draft day.
Hey, Steve, Cliff had kind of joked a little bit about, he said that you might actually welcome being at home this draft a little more than in past drafts, being inside the room. How exactly will that work with making the pick from your home?
Well, I mean, I think that more than anything, the only difference is we're all creatures of habit. But in some cases, I think it's good to jump outside of your comfort zone, and there are certainly some things that I've learned from this process that we'll certainly apply to future drafts. And I welcome the challenge and really feel like all of the work that we've put in, not only from myself, the scouts, the coaching staff, I think it's extremely well. So as far as draft day goes, I'll be here at my home, as well as all of our scouts will be at their homes. Michael and Cliff will be at their homes, and we'll use technology to communicate.
Next, we'll go Bob McManaman, followed by Darren Urban.
Hey, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm curious about philosophy because of the way things are operating this year in the draft. The way you look at a first rounder, a second rounder, all the way down, and I know you only have 6 picks, but are you changing the way you value a first rounder versus a second rounder? And can you tell us what is a first rounder to you normally? What is it now? What's a second rounder? I mean, the third rounder is a guy maybe with a medical history you think can make your team, whereas now he has to make your team. Can you just run down a list like that? What it was, what it is now?
I really don't think a lot of it's changed. The only thing that I do see is because of a potentially shortened off season, which I don't have the details on. You wonder whether that these young men will be ready to participate right away. So there could be some concerns there to make sure that we get the rookies up and running mentally and physically. But aside from that, I don't think we approach it any differently. We value the players the same way. And, if we're taking a player at number 8, we expect them to be an immediate impact player and the type of guy that can certainly upgrade us for the future.
Hey, Steve. Couple things with the Hopkins trade. First of all, a little while ago, but David tweeted out he passed his physical. There was a report that Hopkins had passed his physical. Is that done? And then on a bigger picture, just how that trade came together. We really haven't had a chance to hear from you, and how excited are you that you were able to get that deal done?
Yeah, both those players passed their physicals, and I was alerted this morning. So that trade will commence. And, it's like no other, no different from any other trade. You have conversations with teams throughout the league and see where there's opportunities to try to improve your roster. And DeAndre was a guy that myself and several others in the organization had been really high on. So to be able to get a player of his caliber and to add to the weapons that we already possess, I feel like can certainly take us to the next level. And then when it comes to David Johnson, he did some good things here. Wish him well, and hopefully he'll do the same for the Texans. I mean, I think that it'd be nice to see both parties get something out of this, and for both players to have success moving forward.
Oh, 3 in a row. Cam Cox, Jess Root, Scott Bordeaux.
Steve, hope everything is going well, buddy. Quick question. What has this past really year been like for you? It's no secret where the Cardinals were before you guys hired Cliff, but to reconstruct this roster, to see the vision you had when you drafted Kyler, everything kind of come true, and then to have the success you've had this offseason, what's that been like personally for you?
It's been fun. I mean, I think it's that way almost with every roster. I just feel like the strides that Kyler had made from the beginning of the season to the end, large part were to me really a great sign, not only what he can be as a player, the job that Cliff Kingsbury did with him as well. And then I think, the supporting cast, the guys that stepped up and maybe in cases, a guy like Kenyon Drake, who we traded for, people, didn't depend on in the season. We made the trade, and then all of a sudden Kenyon Drake became a real weapon. So it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to make the additions this offseason in particular. And then obviously a player of DeAndre Hopkins' stature, I mean, I think is something that excites all of us and everyone here in the Valley.
Hey, Steve, when it comes to looking at tackles in the draft, particularly top 10, you've already talked about how left tackle is one of the premium positions. Do you value, or when you're looking at tackles in the first round, do you expect them to be able to play left tackle as opposed to right tackle, or is just a right tackle something you could consider high in the draft?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that nowadays people have gotten onto that, and it's not. I mean, the left tackle was thought of as your premium protector, but people are flopping ends and outside backers now to be able to create those mismatches. So you can't get pigeonholed and just say, oh, we can only play left or right tackle. You want guys to have positional flexibility as well as a scheme that supports that. And there's some of these tackles, they're all different in this draft, which has been fun to watch all these guys because they bring different skill sets. Some are a little more physical, some are better pass protectors. A couple of them can play inside, outside. A couple of them can play left tackle and right tackle. So they have been a lot of fun to evaluate, and we've had a lot of fun stacking those players. And it's going to be interesting to see where those guys go in this draft.
Steve, do you have a top tier of players, and how deep does that tier go?
Yeah, I mean, we usually put those guys in different categories, even though we use a 120 board. And so far, we haven't gotten to that point yet, Scott, but there are definitely about 8 to 10 guys that I think are certainly blue chip type players.
Let's go next to Pedro Gomez, Josh Weinquist, and back to Craig Fouie, please.
Hey, Steve, just curious, you said a little while ago that there are things you've learned because of the uniqueness of this draft that are going to change the way you look at the draft going forward. What are those changes?
I think, Pedro, a couple of the things that I've noticed is just using more technology in a positive manner. That, there are a lot of times that we're creatures of habit. We flew all over the country. We spent a lot of days on the road. And not to say that those aren't important. We'll still do that. But there's, in some cases, in some respects, we feel like the amount of FaceTiming we've done with young men, the amount of time our positional coaches have been able to spend with players on FaceTime, we've actually seen that in some cases, you really have developed better relationships and a better understanding of what this player may be. So I think it's a combination of getting out, seeing the players live, which you're always going to have to do, but also implementing and continuing to use more technology to help you with time management.
Hey, Steve, you have over your tenure as GM, you've pulled off or made some pretty franchise-changing trades. Why do you think you've been able to make those moves? What goes into them? Why do you think you've been so successful being able to make those trades?
That's hard to say. I mean, I think it's just sometimes you're opportunistic and sometimes you just got to be aggressive and try to work the phones. But, hopefully this past trade will certainly bode as well for us as some of the previous ones. I feel like DeAndre is a game changer. He's a guy that can play on the perimeter. He's physical. He's got a great catching radius, strong hands, really good after the catch, and he's a tenacious competitor. So to be able to add a type of player like that to our locker room, to me, gets me really, really excited.
Do you feel like you have a offensive center on the roster right now? And then follow-up is, how important is it to protect Kyler Murray moving forward?
We do. We have guys that can play center, and Mason Cole started every game at center 2 years ago. He played a lot this year at center and guard, so he's shown his positional flexibility. He's extremely smart. He's tough, and he's really, really athletic, climbing and adjusting at the second level. So he's a great fit for our offensive scheme.
Moving along, let's go Howard Balzer, Bob McMahon, and then Darren Urban as the next three.
Steve, what have been some of the challenges just through this process of getting medical updates and really knowing how maybe some players with questions where they stand because of not being able to perhaps get some of that information?
Well, I mean, there's a number of challenges in that regard. You can't get out and see players work out that may have had injuries during the combine process. Then there are the non-combine guys who, generally would fly in and take physicals with our doctors. We were allowed up to 30 players in the springtime to fly in, and a number of those players were non-combine type players, just to make sure that, the guys that we had the highest grades on could get a physical. So, those are challenges. We've just had to be a little more resourceful and reach out to the universities, try to get all the background and the medical information there. And more than anything, just try to be evaluators in terms of injuries as well. See what a guy has been in terms of durability, how much time he's had. Has he had a significant amount of surgeries? Were they big-time surgeries? And really, you have to forecast that and put a medical grade on the player as well.
talked about being aggressive, maybe moving up in the draft. I'm not sure if you're talking about up from number 8 or up back into the second round where you don't have. What kind of draft capital do you guys feel you have, and how far are you talking about moving up? You want to even think about moving up first round to grab a guy like Simmons, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, again, if the opportunity presents itself, a lot of times it's hard to forecast what's going to happen on draft day. I mean, right now, you talk to a lot of other GMs, and really it's just a lot of posturing. I mean, you really don't get anything done because until a player's on the clock, you have no clue. And then you have no clue because you use trade charts. Sometimes the trade charts are applicable, sometimes they're not. So again, to me, they're all hypotheticals. We'll look at every opportunity to go up, to go back. We've done it before when we went up and got Buda Baker. We've also traded back before. So we'll continue to keep the same philosophy moving forward.
Moving along, how about Mark McClune and Scott Bordeaux next, please? How about Scott Bordeaux? Are you on deck?
Hey, Steve, the 4 tackles that are rated, first round, top 15 picks, I know you won't name names. Do you have any one of them graded significantly higher than the others, or are they all bunched together in terms of grades?
They're all fun to watch, I can tell you that. I mean, Andrew Thomas is a guy, he's probably one of the best pass protectors. You got Becton, who's freakish and one of the most powerful and gives you that wow factor. Worse has got tremendous upside athletically, does things out in space that are amazing, and you'd like to think that he's just going to continue to get better and better. And our guy at Alabama is just, he can play guard, he can play right tackle, he's tough, he's nasty. So the guys bring so many different things to the table that you get excited about. At the end of the day, I think that all 4 of them are going to be good players, and you just have to determine what fits what you do best.
Let's go to Josh Weinfuss and Jess Root next, please.
Steve, you talked for years about trusting the tape in the fall, falling in love with a guy on tape in the fall and talking yourself out of him during the spring evaluation period. How much more important is it now that to stick to what you see on tape because you can't really see these guys in pro days and in person and all that?
I think this, through such a tough time in our country and our world, if there's anything that I can point to that's the positive of this process is I think it's given us less of a chance to overthink it. To go out and to be on the road and to question yourself just because the guy ran a faster 3 cone and because he jumped higher. I mean, again, I've been able to watch more tape probably than any year in my time as the general manager. So I've certainly welcomed the challenges and really feel good about this process that we've been through for the last couple of weeks.
Hey, Steve, we heard your comments about CD and Ruggs and Judy back at the Combine. What are your thoughts on the overall depth and talent of the receiver position beyond those guys?
Excellent. And there's guys that are speed guys. There's big physical guys that can go up and get it in the crowd. So it's kind of pick your poison. What are you looking for? Are you looking for an X? You're looking for a Z? You can get them in every round. There are going to be guys that, just like last year's draft, go in the later rounds that have production and are going to turn out to be good players. But there's 4 or 5 of those guys at the top that are really, really exciting to watch.
Next, we'll go Mike Jurecki, Cam Cox, Darren Urban.
Hey, Steve, when you're, maybe sitting there at pick 6 or 7 and you have a couple of names down, how do you value that when you're on the clock versus trading down not too far?
Well, it sort of is that time where you have to look at the board. And if there are 3 or 4 names that you really, really like and you're not in love with one over the other, and you have that opportunity to move back a number of spots, and it all works out where you're moving back 3 and you're in love with 3. I mean, to be able to pick up another pick, as long as it meets the requirements on the trade chart and you feel like you're getting better as an organization, I'm always up for making that trade.
Hey, Steve, just curious, what is the draft setup like at home? Are you working at your kitchen table, in the living room, and then are your kids helping you out with working from home and watching tape and all?
I'm all over the place. I mean, I got monitors everywhere. Unfortunately, 3 of my sons think they know more about the draft than I do. So on a daily basis, I get their updated top 15, who we should take. A lot of comments that I'm trash. So they would agree with a lot of the fans out there.
There we go. Steve, I'm curious in terms of the logistics of draft night. I mean, you've been through so many drafts. You've been in that draft room so many times. What are the challenges for the communication, given what you have to do now compared to what it normally is? And have you guys gone through some dry runs, or is this one of those things where you can only do so much and you're going to have to see what it's like when you're actually in there?
No, we've gone through some dry runs, Darren, and we'll continue to work on that. We've also got some backup. You always have to be prepared, whether there was an outage, if there was a computer meltdown, you always have to be prepared. So it's sort of like going back to old school when I first started scouting. I mean, I have handwritten cards and magnets all over the place. So I have backup boards for the boards, and it's been fun. It kind of takes me back to my young scouting days, and it's also, in some ways, it's sort of like learning as a child. As you're writing out these cards on draft cards, or these names on draft cards, it sort of in a way makes you a little more familiar with the player, and that part of the process has been fun for me.
Moving along, how about Nick King and Bob McManaman next?
Steve, you mentioned the possibility of not overthinking things now. When we were talking to Cliff Kingsbury, he suggested that could make things easier for you on draft night, that you get rid of some of the clutter that can happen in the war room. Do you think that could be a positive on draft night as well?
Absolutely. I'm just going to mute everybody out. But no, this is an organizational decision, and a lot of people have input through this process. Obviously, at the end of the day, it falls on my shoulders, and I'm fine with that. But Cliff and Michael and I will talk on draft night and have quite a few conversations. But it's not going to be a whole lot different because of technology and because of the things that we can do nowadays. It's amazing. It's hard to believe, probably just 10, 15 years ago, we had to go to a library and get beta tapes out and watch them. And now it's one click, and you can have virtual draft boards, and you can have, all this video chats. I mean, it's really amazing how far technology has come. And again, we've really done a nice job on our end using it. And our IT department has been outstanding.
Steve, back to Hopkins and a little bit of Kenyon Drake, two-parter. DeAndre had made indications that he wanted a new deal. Michael Bidwell has told us a couple weeks ago that there will be talks. Can you talk about whether that can get done before the start of the season with DeAndre, and can you get something done with Kenyon beyond the transition tag before the July 15th deadline?
Well, both those guys are guys that we'd like to have long term. I mean, again, if it makes our organization better and it's an opportunity that arises, we'll certainly do that. I've had communication with both their agents, Pat Dye Jr. on Kenyon Drake and Todd France with DeAndre Hopkins. I'll keep the nature of those conversations to myself, but we'll continue to pound away. Again, the draft is the most important part right now, but we'll continue to have ongoing talks with both of those players' agents.
Next up, how about Charlie LaPastora and Mark McClune?
Yeah, Steve, I know you mentioned the IT department and technology, the difference of the setup. I guess, what are you most looking forward to about draft night, and how important has your IT department been for you guys? I know Cliff has talked about that. Michael's mentioned that. How has that been for you?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that for me is amazing is really that they've been able to, on a smaller scale, replicate everything that I do on draft day. So all of the boards that I use, all the different things that I sort of, again, a creature habit that I use during the draft process, they've been able to replicate to be able to do on smaller monitors. Again, the communication with all the scouts, all the coaches, Michael and Cliff, all that is easy. So really we have no excuses. And, I feel like we're going to come away with several good players in this draft. And again, I can't say enough about, what our scouts have done. Quentin Harris, Drew Grigson, all of those guys have done a fantastic job, especially some of the challenges that they've been forced with. And, our coaches have done a great job as well. So again, I feel like we know these players inside and out, and I think it's going to benefit us well.
Hey, Steve, with the social distancing guidelines looking like they're going to extend for a while, how does that affect your timeline? And what do you think that does to kind of the traditional NFL timeline post-draft leading up to the season?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I can't forecast what's going to happen. I do know, we'll have this NFL draft, which, we can do, and we can do it virtually and have no issues, in my opinion. Beyond that, it's really something that I can't answer because I'm not really sure what's going to take place and really where we're going to be at as a country at that point in time. But hopefully it moves along quick and we're able to get back to playing soon.
Next up, Josh Weinfuss, Scott Bordeaux.
Hey, Steve, you talked a little bit about the issues not being able to evaluate guys from a medical standpoint. What happens if you draft a guy, he comes to Arizona whenever he's able to, and the medicals don't match up or there's something wrong with him? Is there something that you guys can do? What's that process going to be like if something like that were to happen?
Yeah, I mean, there are some very rarely do players fail physicals outright. I mean, there are guys that have long-term issues or degenerative changes. So forecasting medical can be tough, but to out and out fail physical, that's pretty hard to do. Although we have seen it. If there was a guy who wasn't at the combine, we don't have a physical on him, and we drafted him and he failed our physical, we would have to listen to our doctors, and that we would miss out on that player. So that could put us in some tough positions, but I don't anticipate that happening.
Steve, you mentioned Mason Cole when you were asked about centers. A.Q. Shipley obviously is a free agent. Are you guys still talking to him, or has the franchise kind of moved on and looking at Mason at that position?
Well, it's like anything else. I mean, there's a number of guys that are free agents right now, but I wouldn't rule anything out, is all I'll say.
Okay, let's do Howard Balzer, Craig Fouey, which will take us to the bottom of the hour, and we'll call it a day.
Things real quick, Steve. One on trades. How do you anticipate that happening with, especially if there might be multiple teams involved in it and the process of communication? And a separate thing, just to end my questions, undrafted free agents. What might be the challenge this year? I know Kevin Colbert suggested adding 3 rounds to the draft. What do you think will happen with a lot of those guys, and especially a lot of them you don't have information?
Yeah, that'll be some of the more difficult things that will arise, I think, with the trades, the speed of the trades, and then being able to sign all the college free agents that we do, which really is like speed dating. I mean, it happens so fast. But through everything else, we'll have it ironed out, and it's really going to be a combination of using your phones and video chats. And I think we have a great setup in place to be able to get all of that accomplished.
Steve, Cliff joked about Kyler lobbying for CeeDee Lamb and kind of laughed about it. But in all sincerity, how important or how much weight would you give to the fact that he played in the same offense he threw to him, and they're coming out of Lincoln Riley's offense?
Well, Kyler has lobbied for CeeDee Lamb. He's lobbied for 4 or 5 offensive linemen, a running back, and a tight end. He hasn't once said anything to me about a defensive player, so I'm not really sure that he's a guy that I'm going to hang my hat on when it comes to draft day.